Welcome to The Last Whisper, where we uncover the most unsettling tales from history's darkest shadows. Today, we explore a centuries-old enigma that has haunted one of England's most unfortunate families. This is the grim history of the Corbyns, where every firstborn met the same fate. Our story begins as the rain beats against the windows of Corbyn Manor. The imposing stone structure stands firm against the Northumberland landscape, its weathered exterior quietly bearing witness to generations of inexplicable loss. The locals avoid its shadow, crossing themselves at the mention of the family name. The Corbyn curse, they call it, a pattern so exact, so unyielding in its repetition, that coincidence alone cannot account for it. For more than 300 years, beginning in 1678, every firstborn Corbyn child has died on the night of their 7th birthday. Not a day earlier, not a day later. Always in the darkest hour, always discovered in the same position, lying face down with arms stretched out, as if reaching for something or someone. No marks, no signs of struggle, no proof of foul play, only the unmistakable look of terror frozen on their innocent faces. Over the centuries, medical examiners have attributed the cause of death to cardiac arrest, yet the unvarying circumstances suggest something far more sinister at work. What force could take a child with such ritualistic exactness? What dark agreement has bound this family to such a dreadful fate? Our investigation begins with Thomas Corbyn, a prosperous merchant who returned from the East Indies in 1677 with a fortune that allowed him to acquire the manor and its surrounding lands. Historical accounts portray Thomas as a stern, pragmatic man with a deep interest in the occult, a fascination he cultivated during his travels through India and parts of the Orient. Local records indicate he brought back numerous artifacts and books on esoteric subjects, establishing a private collection that would become legendary among scholars of the arcane. In the spring of 1677, Thomas married Elizabeth Hale, the daughter of a neighboring landowner. Their union was blessed with a son, Jonathan, born on Midsummer's Eve in 1678. The arrival of an heir brought immense joy to the Corbyn household, though that joy would prove fleeting. On the night of Jonathan's 7th birthday, a violent storm descended upon the estate. Servants reported hearing strange sounds coming from the child's bedchamber, not screams or cries for help, but whispers, as if the boy were speaking with an unseen visitor. When his nurse entered the room at dawn, she found Jonathan lying face down on the floor, arms outstretched, his small body already cold, his eyes wide open, pupils dilated in what the physician described as the most profound terror I have witnessed in my 40 years of practice. Thomas Corbyn was devastated. In his grief, he immersed himself even more deeply in his occult studies, locking himself away in his library for days at a time. Elizabeth, unable to bear the weight of her sorrow, took her own life 6 months later, leaving Thomas alone in the imposing manor with only his books and artifacts for company. 5 years after Jonathan's death, Thomas remarried, a woman named Sarah Winchester, 20 years his junior. Their first child, another son named Richard, was born in 1685. As Richard's 7th birthday approached, Thomas grew increasingly agitated. He hired guards to stand watch outside the boy's room, consulted with clergymen, and even attempted what witnesses described as rituals of protection around the estate. None of it mattered. Richard Corbyn died in the same manner as his half-brother, found face down with arms outstretched on the morning after his 7th birthday, his face twisted in an expression of absolute horror. This pattern would repeat with unrelenting consistency across generations. Thomas Corbyn died in 1696, leaving his estate to his third son, William, who had somehow survived past his 7th year, perhaps because he was not a firstborn. William would later lose his firstborn daughter, Mary, in 1712. Mary's body was discovered in the identical position, bearing the same expression of terror that was becoming the hallmark of the Corbyn curse. What could possibly explain this chilling pattern? Local folklore offers various theories: a witch's curse placed upon Thomas for stealing treasures from a sacred temple during his time in the East, a demonic pact demanding the sacrifice of firstborn children, or perhaps something far more ancient that had attached itself to the land long before the Corbyns arrived. Parish records from St. Michael's Church reveal that in 1724, following the death of another Corbyn child, the local priest attempted an exorcism of the manor. The priest, Father Ambrose Blackwood, left detailed accounts of his experience. He wrote of an oppressive presence that seemed to seep from the very walls, and whispers in an ancient tongue that caused the candles to flicker and die. The exorcism was abandoned when Father Blackwood collapsed, suffering a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak for the remainder of his life. By the mid-18th century, the Corbyn family had become notorious throughout England. Despite their wealth and standing, they found themselves increasingly isolated, unable to form alliances through marriage, as few families were willing to connect themselves to such a cursed bloodline. Yet the Corbyns persisted, each generation hoping to break the pattern that had claimed so many innocent lives. In 1783, Charles Corbyn, a man of science rather than superstition, approached his son Edward's 7th birthday with methodical determination. He invited physicians from London and Edinburgh to observe the boy through the night. The room was lit with dozens of candles, and 4 men kept constant vigil at the child's bedside. Charles himself stood guard at the door, a loaded pistol in hand. As midnight approached, the physicians noted a sudden drop in temperature. The candles dimmed despite no detectable draft. Edward, who had been sleeping peacefully, began to whisper in his sleep, words that none of the observers could understand, but that one physician described as ancient and guttural in nature. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, all the candles extinguished simultaneously. In the confusion that followed, with the men scrambling to relight the room, Edward somehow moved from his bed to the floor. By the time light was restored, the boy lay in the now familiar position, face down, arms outstretched, his face frozen in terror. None of the observers could explain how it happened, or what force could have stopped a child's heart without leaving a single mark on his body. Charles Corbyn's detailed account of that night, along with the signed testimonies of the physicians present, provides one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that whatever plagued the Corbyn family defied rational explanation. Charles himself suffered a mental breakdown following his son's death and spent his remaining years in an asylum, where attendants reported that he would whisper constantly about the collector of children and the debt that must be paid. As the Victorian era dawned, the Corbyns had learned to live with their curse. Some branches of the family chose not to have children at all, while others would send their firstborn away before their 7th birthday, hoping distance might protect them. It never did. No matter where these children were, whether in boarding schools in Switzerland or with relatives in America, they were found dead on the morning after their 7th birthday. Always in the same position, always with the same expression of terror. In 1856, the curse claimed Victoria Corbyn, the daughter of James Corbyn, who had taken the drastic step of changing the family name and moving to a remote estate in Scotland. Despite these precautions, Victoria died exactly as her ancestors had. James, driven by grief and rage, returned to Corbyn Manor and set fire to the East Wing, which housed Thomas Corbyn's infamous library. Most of the occult collection was destroyed, but not before James had examined its contents thoroughly, searching for answers. Among the salvaged papers was Thomas Corbyn's journal from his time in India. The journal contained references to a temple in the mountains north of Kolkata, where Thomas had been shown a relic of immeasurable age by a holy man who warned him never to remove it from its sacred resting place. Thomas described the relic as a small figurine carved from black stone, depicting a seated entity with the body of a child but the face of an ancient. The holy man told Thomas that the figurine was a vessel for a being that fed on the essence of innocence, specifically, the untapped potential of young lives. According to Thomas's account, he dismissed these warnings as native superstition and secretly took the figurine when he left the temple. He wrote of strange dreams during the voyage back to England, dreams in which the figurine spoke to him, promising wealth and prosperity in exchange for the smallest of tributes. Thomas initially interpreted these dreams as manifestations of guilt, but as his subsequent writings grew increasingly disturbed, it became clear that he believed he had made a bargain with something inhuman. The final pages of the journal, written shortly after Jonathan's death, contained a frantically scrawled confession: "I have damned not only my soul, but the souls of all who shall come after me. The collector has marked us. The debt shall be paid through generations, and I am powerless to stop it." This journal provides the first solid clue to the origin of the Corbyn curse, but it raises more questions than it answers. What became of the black figurine? Was it destroyed in the fire that consumed the library? Or does it still reside somewhere within Corbyn Manor, continuing its grim harvest through the centuries? In 1887, renowned medium and spiritualist Helena Blavatsky was invited to Corbyn Manor by Frederick Corbyn, who had lost his son Alfred just 3 months prior. Blavatsky's detailed account of her séance at the manor describes making contact with what she called a consciousness of immense age and alien nature. She reported that this entity identified itself not as a human spirit, but as something that had existed before mankind crawled from the primordial ooze. Most disturbingly, Blavatsky claimed that this entity spoke through her in a language that Frederick Corbyn identified as similar to the whispers his son had uttered in his sleep during the weeks leading up to his death. Blavatsky advised Frederick to abandon the manor immediately, warning that the entity had attached itself not just to the Corbyn bloodline, but to the very land itself. She refused to return for a second séance, and in later writings referred to Corbyn Manor as a wound in the fabric of reality through which something hungry peers into our world. Frederick Corbyn did abandon the manor, moving his family to London and then eventually to Boston. But the curse followed. His second son, born in America and named William after his grandfather, died on his 7th birthday in 1895, found face down with arms outstretched on the floor of his bedroom in their Beacon Hill home, thousands of miles from Northumberland. As we enter the 20th century, the Corbyn family's tragic history becomes somewhat easier to track through newspaper accounts and medical records. In 1913, Peter Corbyn, a respected surgeon in Edinburgh, approached his daughter Catherine's 7th birthday with clinical precision. He arranged for her to be under observation in a hospital connected to early monitoring equipment that could record her heart rate and breathing. A team of nurses and fellow physicians kept constant watch. The medical records from that night note that at 2:45 a.m., Catherine's heart rate suddenly accelerated, though she showed no external signs of distress. At 2:57 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped dramatically, enough that ice crystals formed on the water glass beside her bed. At exactly 3 a.m., all electrical equipment in the room failed simultaneously. When emergency lights were activated 3 minutes later, Catherine was found on the floor beside her bed in a position that had become the signature of the Corbyn curse. The medical equipment, once power was restored, showed no heartbeat. Peter Corbyn's detailed report on his daughter's death represents one of the first attempts to document the curse using modern scientific methods. He noted that during the autopsy, no physical cause of death could be determined, Catherine's heart showed no abnormalities, and there were no signs of asphyxiation or trauma. Peter eventually published his findings in a medical journal under a pseudonym, describing what he called a death by fear so profound that it caused the heart to simply cease functioning. The 2 world wars brought their own tragedies to England, and for a time the Corbyn curse seemed almost unremarkable amid the broader suffering. However, the pattern continued unabated. In 1942, during the height of the London Blitz, 7-year-old Thomas Corbyn died in an underground shelter where his family had taken refuge from German bombs. Despite being surrounded by dozens of people in the crowded space, no one saw how the boy moved from his sleeping position between his parents to the cold concrete floor several feet away. He was discovered at dawn, face down with arms outstretched, wearing the same expression of terror that had marked Corbyn deaths for over 250 years. In 1967, the curse took an unexpected turn with the case of James Corbyn, a professor of anthropology at Cambridge University. Unlike his ancestors, James approached his son Robert's 7th birthday as an anthropological challenge rather than a supernatural curse. Having studied death rituals and beliefs across cultures, James was convinced that the consistent pattern of Corbyn deaths represented a form of what he called familial death imprinting, essentially a psychosomatic phenomenon in which the expectation of death according to a specific pattern could actually manifest that pattern physically. James documented his theory extensively and arranged for Robert to be placed in a medically induced coma on the evening of his 7th birthday. His reasoning was that if the child was unconscious, the psychological elements of the curse would be neutralized. Robert was admitted to a London hospital, sedated and connected to the most advanced monitoring equipment available at the time. A team of doctors, nurses, and 2 fellow anthropologists observed through the night. What happened next defies explanation. Despite being heavily sedated, at precisely 3:03 a.m., Robert's eyes opened. The monitoring equipment showed that he remained in a comatose state, yet his eyes were wide and alert. According to witness statements, the boy began to whisper in what one nurse described as a voice that couldn't possibly have come from a child's throat. The temperature in the room plummeted, and several pieces of monitoring equipment shorted out. When the backup systems came online moments later, Robert was no longer in his hospital bed. Despite the room being locked from the inside and continuously observed, the boy was found on the floor, face down with arms outstretched, in the classic position of the Corbyn curse. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest but could not explain how a sedated child could have moved from his bed to the floor, nor how his heart could have failed when the monitoring equipment had shown normal function right up until the power failure. James Corbyn's colleagues published his research posthumously. James took his own life 3 days after his son's death, leaving behind a note that contained just 3 words, "It is real." This incident marked a turning point in how the Corbyn family approached their curse. If even modern medicine and complete unconsciousness could not prevent the pattern from continuing, what hope did they have of breaking it? Many Corbyns chose not to have children at all, leading several branches of the family to die out completely by the end of the 20th century. Those who did continue the bloodline often took desperate measures. In 1983, Michael and Sarah Corbyn gave their firstborn son up for adoption immediately after birth, arranging for him to be placed with a family in New Zealand who were never told of his biological heritage. They legally changed their last name and moved to Canada, believing that if the child never knew he was a Corbyn, he might somehow be spared. Their efforts were in vain. On July 12, 1990, 7-year-old David Marshall, born David Corbyn, died in his bed in Auckland, New Zealand. He was found face down on the floor, arms outstretched, his face frozen in terror. The adoptive parents had no connection to the Corbyn family and had never heard of the curse. The local authorities ruled the death a case of sudden unexplained death in childhood, SUDC, but those familiar with the Corbyn history recognized the unmistakable pattern. This case raises disturbing questions about the nature of the curse. How did it track down a child who had no knowledge of his heritage, who lived on the opposite side of the world under a different name? Was it truly tied to the bloodline itself, operating on some genetic level beyond our understanding? Or was it something more metaphysical, a debt that would be collected regardless of distance or awareness? In 1998, the remaining Corbyns gathered at the ancestral manor, which had stood largely abandoned since the 1960s, for what they called a family council. Representatives from every surviving branch of the family came together to share information, compare experiences, and search for patterns that might have been missed. They brought family records, journals, medical reports, and personal accounts spanning 3 centuries of tragedy. One of the attendees was Dr. Elizabeth Corbyn, a geneticist who had been studying the family's DNA for potential abnormalities that might explain the consistent pattern of cardiac arrest. While she found no obvious genetic markers for heart defects, she did discover something unusual, a distinctive genetic sequence present in all Corbyn descendants that she could not identify. When she ran the sequence through international genetic databases, she found partial matches in samples taken from ancient burial sites in northern India, precisely the region where Thomas Corbyn had acquired the mysterious black figurine in 1677. Another participant, historian and Corbyn descendant Richard Thorne, who had changed his name from Corbyn when he turned 18, presented his analysis of family records dating back to Thomas's original journal. He had identified a pattern no one had noticed before. The deaths always occurred on the night of the 7th birthday, but only when that birthday fell within 3 days of a new moon. In cases where the birthday occurred during other lunar phases, the death would come on the night closest to the birthday that coincided with the new moon. This lunar connection added a new dimension to the mystery. Was there an astronomical component to the curse? Did Thomas Corbyn inadvertently tie his family's fate to some cosmic cycle when he took the figurine from its temple? The most remarkable presentation came from Clara Corbyn, an elderly woman who had lost her son Andrew in 1965. Clara had devoted her life to researching the curse and had traveled to India in the 1970s to locate the temple mentioned in Thomas Corbyn's journal. After years of searching, she claimed to have found it, or rather its ruins, in a remote area of the Himalayan foothills. According to Clara, the temple had been dedicated to an entity the locals called the Collector of Potential, a being that fed on possibilities rather than actualities. The priests believed this entity existed in a state of perpetual hunger for the infinite possibilities contained within a developing human consciousness. A child of 7, they believed, represented the perfect balance between formed personality and unlimited potential, old enough to have become an individual, but young enough that their future remained unwritten. Clara explained that the black figurine Thomas had stolen was not just a representation of this entity, but a vessel that contained a portion of its essence. By removing it from the temple, Thomas had broken ancient wards of containment, allowing the entity direct access to our world with the Corbyn bloodline as its entry point. Most disturbing of all, Clara revealed that during her investigation of the temple ruins, she had discovered an inner chamber containing wall carvings that depicted the entity's feeding process. These carvings showed children lying face down with arms outstretched, exactly the position in which every Corbyn Firstborn had been found. The family council concluded with a ritual designed by Clara, who had studied various protective practices during her travels using elements from multiple spiritual traditions. The gathered Corbyns attempted to sever the connection between their bloodline and the entity. The ritual lasted from sunset to sunrise, culminating at the exact moment of the new moon. For a brief time, there was hope that their efforts had succeeded. 2 Corbyn children passed their 7th birthdays without incident in 1999 and 2000. But in 2003, the curse returned with the death of Emily Corbyn, who died in the familiar manner despite her parents' adherence to the protective measures established at the council. In the years since, the pattern has continued unabated. Modern medical science has provided new insights. MRI scans of Corbyn children have revealed unusual brain activity in the weeks leading up to their 7th birthdays, particularly during sleep. EEG readings have captured what neurologists describe as patterns consistent with someone engaged in conversation occurring while the children are in deep sleep states. Several Corbyn children in the days before their deaths have reported seeing the old child in their dreams, a figure they describe as looking like a boy or girl their own age, but with eyes that are ancient and hungry. These children often draw pictures of this figure, which show remarkable consistency despite the children having no contact with one another. Perhaps the most compelling recent evidence comes from Jack Corbyn, who died in 2017. His parents, both medical professionals, had installed a sophisticated monitoring system in his room, including infrared cameras and temperature sensors. The footage from the night of Jack's 7th birthday shows the room growing progressively colder starting at midnight. At approximately 2:45 a.m., a shadow appears in the corner of the room, a shadow that does not correspond to any physical object and that seems to move independently of the room's light sources. At 2:58 a.m., Jack, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly sits upright in bed. His lips begin to move, though the audio captures no sound. At exactly 3 a.m., the cameras experience interference for precisely 15 seconds. When the image clears, Jack is no longer in his bed but lying face down on the floor, arms outstretched, already lifeless. This footage, which has been analyzed by multiple experts in various fields from video technology to paranormal research, offers no definitive explanation. The shadow phenomenon has been replicated in other cases where monitoring equipment was present, leading some researchers to suggest that what we are seeing is not the entity itself, but rather its effect on our reality, a sort of shadow cast by something moving through dimensions we cannot perceive. In 2020, a new approach was attempted with twins born to Rachel Corbyn and her husband Paul Winters. As firstborn, their daughter Lily would traditionally be vulnerable to the curse. But some family members theorized that the entity's focus on firstborn potential might be confused or diluted in the case of twins who share a womb and enter the world only minutes apart. To further test this theory, Rachel and Paul decided not to tell the twins which one had been born first. They reasoned that if the curse operated on some level of awareness or belief, keeping this information secret might protect both children. They went so far as to create false birth certificates showing their son Michael as the firstborn, while in reality Lily had preceded him by 8 minutes. This deception extended to everyone in the children's lives, family members, teachers, even their pediatrician was given the false information. The twins themselves grew up believing Michael was the elder sibling. As their 7th birthday approached in 2022, the family prepared both protective measures based on Clara Corbyn's ritual and modern monitoring equipment to document whatever might occur. On the night of July 7, 2022, both children were put to bed in separate rooms, each under observation by teams including medical professionals, paranormal researchers, and family members familiar with the curse's pattern. The night passed without incident until 2:45 a.m., when temperature sensors in both rooms recorded a simultaneous drop. At 2:58, both children sat up in their beds and appeared to engage in one-sided conversations. The monitoring teams, communicating via radio, confirmed identical patterns of behavior in both rooms. At precisely 3 a.m., power fluctuations affected both monitoring systems. When emergency backup systems activated 12 seconds later, a horrifying discovery awaited. Lily Winters, the true firstborn, lay face down on the floor in the traditional position, while her brother Michael remained asleep in his bed, apparently unaffected. The entity, it seemed, could not be fooled by human deception. It knew which child was truly the firstborn, even when that information had been carefully hidden from everyone, including the children themselves. This case, thoroughly documented by multiple witnesses and recording devices, represents one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that whatever force plagues the Corbyn family operates on a level beyond normal human understanding. It cannot be deceived. It cannot be deterred by distance or ignorance. And it adheres to its pattern with unwavering precision. Which brings us to the present day and the most recent developments in this centuries-old mystery. In 2023, Dr. Meredith Kline, a quantum physicist with an interest in fringe phenomena, proposed a new theory about the Corbyn curse after studying the family's history and the data collected from recent cases. Dr. Kline suggests that what we are witnessing is not supernatural in the traditional sense, but rather a manifestation of what she calls quantum predation. Her theory posits that the entity described in the ancient Indian texts is a consciousness that exists primarily in quantum states, feeding on the collapse of quantum potentialities into single outcomes. A 7-year-old child, according to Dr. Kline's theory, represents a nexus point of nearly infinite potential futures. The entity that Thomas Corbyn inadvertently brought into contact with his bloodline feeds on the moment of collapse when all those potential futures are reduced to a single one, death. The position in which the children are found, face down, arms outstretched, represents what Dr. Kline calls a posture of quantum surrender, when all possibilities except one are extinguished. While Dr. Kline's theory remains controversial in scientific circles, it offers the first framework that attempts to explain the Corbyn curse in terms that, while extraordinary, do not rely entirely on supernatural concepts. She has proposed an experiment that would involve creating a quantum shield around the next Corbyn child to reach their 7th birthday, essentially isolating them from the quantum field that the entity might use to access our reality. The opportunity to test this theory may come soon. As of this recording, there are 3 Corbyn descendants approaching their 7th birthdays in the coming year. One family has agreed to work with Dr. Kline on implementing her quantum shield concept, while another is pursuing a more traditional approach involving religious protection from multiple faith traditions simultaneously. The third family has chosen to leave the country entirely, relocating to an undisclosed location under assumed names, though history suggests this strategy is unlikely to succeed. What makes the Corbyn curse so profoundly disturbing is not just its longevity or its precision, but the questions it raises about the nature of reality itself. If an entity can track a specific bloodline across centuries and continents, if it can claim its victims despite every conceivable precaution, what does that tell us about the world we think we understand? Are there forces operating in dimensions beyond our perception that can reach into our reality and extract what they need, regardless of our beliefs or defenses? The black figurine that Thomas Corbyn removed from that ancient temple has never been found. Some believe it was destroyed in the fire that consumed the manor's east wing in 1856. Others suggest it might be hidden somewhere within the walls of Corbyn Manor, which has remained in family hands despite standing largely uninhabited for decades. A few Corbyn descendants have proposed demolishing the building entirely, but concerns that such an action might unleash whatever remains bound to the site have prevented this approach. The current owner of the property, Richard Corbyn, allows researchers controlled access to the grounds and the manor itself, though the structure has deteriorated significantly over the years. Those who have spent time inside report consistent experiences, a sense of being watched, sudden cold spots that move throughout the building, and what many describe as whispers at the edge of hearing in a language no one can identify. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2021 revealed anomalies beneath the eastern foundation of the manor, spaces that don't appear on any architectural plans and that may predate the Corbyn occupation of the land. Excavation permits have been requested but not yet granted, as the site is now considered of historical significance. As we conclude our exploration of the Corbyn family curse, we are left with more questions than answers. Is this truly the work of an ancient entity brought to England by a merchant who didn't understand the forces he was tampering with? Is it a manifestation of quantum mechanics that our science is only beginning to comprehend? Or is it something else entirely, a pattern so deeply embedded in reality that it transcends our categories of natural and supernatural? What we know with certainty is this: for over 300 years, the firstborn children of the Corbyn bloodline have died on their 7th birthdays, found in identical positions, their faces frozen in identical expressions of terror. No precaution has prevented it. No distance has forestalled it. No deception has confused it. The pattern continues with merciless precision, claiming generation after generation. The next Corbyn's 7th birthday will occur on October 31, 2024, a date that coincides with both Halloween and a new moon. 7-year-old William Corbyn, currently living in Toronto with his parents, represents the latest in a long line of children marked by a curse that has defied explanation for centuries. His parents have agreed to work with Dr. Klein on implementing her quantum shield theory in what may be the most scientifically advanced attempt yet to break the pattern. Will modern quantum physics succeed where religion, distance, deception, and medical science have failed? Or will William become the next in a long line of Corbyn children to be found face down, arms outstretched, another victim of whatever force has claimed his ancestors for over 3 centuries? As we wait to find out, one thing remains clear: the Corbyn curse represents one of the most compelling and well-documented cases of unexplained phenomena in recorded history. If such a consistent pattern of inexplicable deaths can persist through centuries, defying every rational explanation and protective measure, what other forces might be operating in our world just beyond the limits of our understanding? The Corbyns continue their desperate search for answers, racing against a clock that has been ticking since 1678. For the sake of William and all future Corbyn firstborns, we can only hope they find those answers before it's too late. This has been the Ghastly Journal, bringing you the darkest truths from history's shadows. Remember, not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to remind us that our understanding of reality is far more limited than we care to admit. Until next time, keep watching the shadows. And if you hear whispers in a language you don't recognize, don't listen too closely. Update: after completing our initial research for this video, we received troubling news. William Corbyn, the 7-year-old boy mentioned in our conclusion, died on February 3, 2024, 8 months before his scheduled participation in Dr. Klein's quantum shield experiment. Though his 7th birthday was not until October, February 3 marked the new moon closest to the 7th anniversary of a severe illness William suffered as an infant, a bout of pneumonia that left him clinically dead for 3 minutes before doctors were able to revive him. The entity, it seems, has adapted its pattern. William was found face down on his bedroom floor, arms outstretched, his face frozen in the same expression of terror that has marked Corbyn deaths for over 3 centuries. Dr. Klein has theorized that the entity may be evolving, becoming more aggressive in claiming its tribute from the Corbyn bloodline. If the pattern is indeed changing, the remaining Corbyn families may have even less time than they thought to find a solution. We will continue to follow this case and provide updates as new information becomes available. For now, the Corbyn curse remains unbroken, its hunger undiminished after 346 years. Those interested in supporting further research into the Corbyn phenomenon can contact the Ghastly Journal directly. All inquiries will be kept strictly confidential, as the family continues to avoid public attention that has often led to exploitation and sensationalism of their tragedy. Good night, and remember, some patterns in this world run deeper than we can possibly imagine. The Corbyn family has learned this truth through centuries of heartbreak. We would be wise to heed the warning their story provides. There are forces in this world that operate by rules we do not understand, and some debts once incurred can never truly be escaped. The black figurine that started it all may remain hidden, but its influence continues to reach through time, claiming the futures of children who should have had lifetimes ahead of them. Whatever entity Thomas Corbyn encountered in that ancient temple still feeds, generation after generation, on the most innocent members of his bloodline. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Corbyn curse is its implication for our understanding of free will and fate. If an entity can mark a bloodline so thoroughly that no action, no distance, no precaution can break its hold, are we truly as free as we believe? Or are there patterns woven into reality that bind certain lineages to inescapable destinies? For the Corbyns, this philosophical question has deadly practical implications. Every time a child is born into the family, the clock begins ticking toward their 7th year. Every parent knows what awaits. Yet they are powerless to prevent it. As Dr. Klein continues her work on quantum theories that might explain and potentially counter the curse, other researchers are pursuing different avenues. Anthropologists have begun a more thorough investigation of the temple site in India, where Thomas Corbyn acquired the figurine. Linguistic experts are studying the whispers reported by witnesses, attempting to identify the language and potentially translate what is being communicated. Most recently, a team of geneticists has proposed a radical solution: gene therapy that would target and modify the distinctive genetic sequence found in all Corbyn descendants. If this sequence truly represents the entity's anchor to the bloodline, altering it might sever the connection entirely. This approach raises profound ethical questions, but for a family that has lived with death's shadow for centuries, the potential benefits may outweigh the risks. The Corbyn curse forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our reality. We like to believe we understand the rules that govern our world, that science can explain all phenomena given enough time and data. But cases like this challenge that comfortable assumption. Perhaps there are layers to existence that our current frameworks cannot accommodate, forces that operate according to rules we have yet to discover. For now, the Corbyns continue their centuries-long battle against an enemy they cannot see, but whose presence they feel in every generation. The pattern remains unbroken. The debt continues to be collected. And the whispers still echo through Corbyn Manor on moonless nights, speaking in a language as old as fear itself. This is truly the end of our account of the macabre history of the Corbyns. But their story continues as it has for nearly 3.5 centuries, written in the pattern of small bodies found face down on cold floors, arms outstretched toward futures they will never experience. Whatever entity Thomas Corbyn encountered in that ancient temple continues its harvest, claiming the potential of children at the precise moment when their futures contain the most possibilities. And until someone finds a way to break the pattern, it will continue its grim collection, generation after generation, with the merciless precision that has made the Corbyn curse one of history's most enduring and terrifying mysteries. Sleep well, and keep your children close. Not all debts are ours to pay, but some are inherited in the blood, passed down through generations like a shadow that can never be outrun. The Lat Whisper will return with more tales from history's darkest corners. Until then, remember that not all patterns are meant to be understood. Some are simply meant to be feared.